Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, books, and in popular culture. Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I am joined by the co-host and sometimes executive producer, Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you this week?
I'm doing really good, Bruce. It's nice to see the month of March, so I'm happy about that. How's everything been going with you?
Things going pretty good. I'm glad that March is here. It's a sign that spring is not that far away, even though the official start of spring, what is it, March 21st? Is
Yes,
that what it is? Yeah.
it is.
It doesn't really coincide with our spring, either in upstate New York or where you are in Nova Scotia, but at least it's a sign that we're getting close. We're
Yeah,
coming into the spring. Spring is probably my favorite time of year. Before we get into heat of the summer, I really like spring. It's the start of the baseball season. A lot of good things going on. So, yeah, spring is definitely a good time and something to look forward to.
it
Absolutely.
is.
Well, to look forward to on this show, we have a couple of films that we're going to examine in some depth. Neither of them are recent movies, these are vintage films, and they're celebrating anniversaries in March of 2025. One of the movies is Trilogy of Terror, excellent made-for-TV movie, came out 50 years ago, back in March of 75. I didn't see it when it was first on TV, at least not that I remember, but did see it in later showings on television. And the other film is an absolute classic of a ghost story called The Changeling, and that debuted in March of 1980, and that's 45 years ago. Those are the numbers on these two films in terms of milestone anniversaries. And even though they're older films, I think, Tracy, they're both very much worth talking about during a program. So let's do that in this episode. We'll begin with Trilogy of Terror. So it debuted March 4th, 1975, premiered in prime time on the ABC network as part of their Movie of the Week feature. And the film stars the longtime horror actress, one of my favorites, Karen Black. She plays four different characters in three short stories. Now, while much of the focus of this film over time has been on that memorable third segment, of course, that features the infamous Zuni doll, the first two stories I think are underrated and both worth discussing. So we'll get into all three of the stories. In the very first vignette, titled Julie, we have Karen Black playing a very shy, nearly antisocial college professor. And she becomes the focal point, if you will, of a student named Chad Foster. So Chad openly complains to his friends that there are very few attractive female students on campus. I remember hearing this when I was in college back in the 1980s. We complained that there weren't enough attractive girls around. I'm sure they were saying the same thing about us, and they probably had a more legitimate point. But
Oh
this
my
is a
goodness.
common refrain. It's a common refrain on college campuses. Things haven't changed, whether you're talking 70s, 80s, or today. So anyway, Chad, who has a bit of an ego, he's complaining that there's nobody suitable for him. So he decides, I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to play a bit of a joke on that frumpy, unattractive teacher, Julie. And they do make Karen Black look somewhat unattractive with her makeup and her dress. So Chad decides he's going to ask her out on a date, even though he's the student, she's the teacher. This is completely inappropriate. This is inappropriate, I think, in any era. Doesn't matter whether you're talking back in the 70s or today, but it still goes on.
Mhm.
Anyway, reluctantly, Julie, the teacher, agrees to go to the movies with Chad. And then Chad finds himself in kind of an unexpected situation. He actually becomes attracted to her and really almost becomes infatuated with his teacher, Julie. So he meant it as a joke, but it turns out to be something different. And then toward the end of this story, we have a major surprise. I remember the first time I saw it. Didn't see that coming at all. Now, here's something interesting, Tracy. In real life, Karen Black was married to the actor who plays Chad. The actor's named Robert Burton. But between the time of the filming of the movie and when it was released, March of 1975, during that interim time, the couple had divorced. So it makes you wonder if things were tense on the film set during the shoot. And I guess it ruined any kind of, let's watch the movie together when it appears on national TV for the first time. So that was kind of an interesting situation. So that's the first story, Julie. Then we move on to the middle story. And this one is titled Millicent and Therese. So Karen Black in this one plays each of two rival sisters. And they are diametrical opposites. Millicent is generally wholesome, strong set of morals, a little bit on the self-righteous side too. And she actually comes to absolutely despise Therese. I mean, she hates Therese. She considers Therese completely evil to the point that she actually hopes one of her friends will take out Therese, kill her. And if her friends won't do it, Millicent is thinking, I'm going to do it. This unhealthy relationship between the two sisters will end with a rather stunning resolution. One of the interesting things about this film, there is an appearance by a veteran actor, John Carlin, and he, of course, was so good playing the character of Willie Loomis in the Dark Shadows TV series. And Carlin frequently did work for Dan Curtis Productions. And this film, we should mention, directed by Dan Curtis, who also directed Dark Shadows. So he worked a lot with Carlin. The two were very comfortable with each other. So Carlin does have a small role in that second story. So that's Millicent and Therese. Then, Tracy, we move on to the third story, which is not titled Tracy, but is titled Amelia. And in this third story, Karen Black portrays a woman who is continually pestered by her overprotective mother. While in her apartment one night, Amelia is examining an African Zuni doll that she has purchased and plans to give to her boyfriend Arthur as a birthday present. Now, Amelia wants to spend the birthday night with her boyfriend. That's certainly understandable. But her mother is calling her on the phone, pestering her again, and asks Amelia to spend the night with her. So this, of course, creates a conflict for Amelia. However, she will soon discover that she has much bigger problems than this, because this African Zuni doll, which is somewhat distasteful to look at, unless you're like us and you're into that sort of thing. Most normal people would look at it and say, oh, that's really fearsome looking. Well, it turns out the doll has special powers, and they will be revealed very shortly in the apartment. So that's the basic gist of this, the anthology film, 3 stories. Richard Matheson, by the way, the screenwriter for the film, along with another writer, William Nolan, and Matheson used his own short story, Prey, as the basis for the Amelia story. So that's where it comes from. And he kind of knew that that was going to be a really good, frightening story. So they made that the last of the 3. So that's the gist. That's the storyline for Trilogy of Terror. I'm curious, Tracy, if you can recall the first time you saw this movie and what were your initial reactions when you saw it for the first time?
Oh my gosh. So I don't remember how young I was when I saw this movie. Um, and I don't really remember it well, but I did see it, I want to say, for the first time not that long ago, in preparation just for, talking about this. And eh, I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was actually really good. I like the way that it was broken out into the 3 stories. I really like that idea sometimes to be able to sit down and, watch 3 different stories instead of one really long movie. And you were talking about the first one. I have a question for you about that. What
Yeah.
what was wrong with Julie? I couldn't figure out if she was possessed or if she was like a witch or just a psychopath. I don't know if that I don't know if that was ever revealed, but I was like perplexed for the entire story.
I don't think she had any supernatural powers. I don't think
Hmm.
she was a witch. I think she created this persona of being somewhat unattractive and frumpy and innocent, and then, without giving the whole thing away for those who haven't seen it, pulling a bit of a switcheroo toward the end.
Mhm.
I don't think, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I don't think she had any kind of supernatural powers.
Oh,
I think she
interesting.
was just creating a public persona that was maybe hiding the real Julie. And when I say she's unattractive, I mean, it's not that she was, ugly or anything like that. She just, she didn't put a lot of attention into, dressing in fine clothing and maybe putting makeup on. I think all of us, no matter, whether we're, very handsome or beautiful, or most of us are, somewhere in between beautiful and not so beautiful. I don't think, actually, I do think that all of us can have that ability to kind of show off two sides. If we want to look really attractive, we can make the effort to do so, get our hair cut, put makeup on, do something different with our hair, have nice clothes. It's a lot easier, though, for most of us to look not so attractive. That usually happens when we first wake up in the morning or wake up from a nap in mid afternoon. And I kind of think Julie has taken sort of the second approach here, because I think in real
Oh.
life, Karen Black was pretty attractive.
Oh,
You know?
absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
She had, like, a very uniqueness about her too, like, from, like, her acting
yeah,
capabilities, but just, like, her overall appearance. It was super unique. She's a very
yeah.
underrated actress.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So you didn't see this as a child like I did. You saw this within the last few years?
Yeah, definitely within the last few years, and then I rewatched it just recently to get, like, a better grasp of it, because I
Mhm.
think when I saw it the very first time, like, it would have been, like, multiple years ago, and it might have just been one of those films that I watched, but then just didn't think about it again. So,
Yeah.
yeah, just I
The
don't think
reason
it
I
left.
ask
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
The reason I ask is because I saw it as a child and liked it, found it very frightening, especially the
Mhm.
third story. And then I watched it as an adult a few years ago, and it held up for me. And sometimes,
Right.
when you watch a movie like this when you're young, and then you go back to it as an adult when you have better appreciation, you're a little more sophisticated, you have a different feeling. It doesn't hold up. This one did for me.
Nice. Yeah, because, like, it's one of those things too. I don't I don't feel like they have very many types of movies like this anymore, like these anthology stories. Like,
No.
I don't recall anything like that anymore. So, it's actually a cool concept, actually.
Yeah. There are some of these movies that are still made, but they tend not to be very good.
Mhm.
And some of them I've noticed, like on some of the streaming services, they say that, there's 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 stories. I just think that's way too much. 3, 4, maybe 5 at max is good.
Mhm.
In this one, it's 3 stories, and I think they all happen to be good, so it's a hit. If you have 5 stories, if you hit on 3 of the 5, that's pretty good. If
Mhm.
you have 3 stories, you wanna hit on all 3, and I think Dan Curtis and Karen Black do so in Trilogy of Terror. I think all 3
Oh,
stories are worthwhile.
absolutely. Definitely.
So what'd you think of, the film in terms of each of the stories? Let's break down the first one, Julie, and you've talked about, how you weren't exactly sure about, her background, whether she had witch-like, powers. What did you think of the Chad Foster character? I didn't find him very likable. I don't think you did either.
No. Not at all, and it really surprised me. I had no idea
Yeah,
that Karen Black and Chad were actually, like, the actor were married in real life. I had no idea.
yeah,
They definitely don't, strike me as a couple, but, as a character, he was not a great character. He was kind of icky, left me with the icks,
yeah,
just to know that he was blackmailing his teacher. I really felt bad for Karen Black's character in that first episode. You
yeah.
kind of feel like she was taken advantage of, and, you know, her friend was saying, "Oh, you should dress up more and go out and make more of an effort." And, I felt bad for her, but at the end, I was like, I did not feel bad for her at all.
No.
I did
Yeah,
not. So the twist, it was quite a twisty turn for me at
yeah.
the end. I was not expecting that at all. I should have, but I didn't.
When I saw the movie Tracy for the first time, I didn't know they were married in real life. He seemed quite a bit younger, and of course, in the story, he's the teacher, or he's the student, she's the teacher. So you'd assume there's a gap in age there, and I do think Karen Black was probably older than him in real life. But
Mhm.
no, there's no way that I thought that they would have been a married couple. They didn't have that kind of chemistry in the story, and I don't think they were supposed to. There was
No,
obviously
God.
supposed to be tension there because, Chad, he goes into this, really, this is more of a joke, a prank. I don't think he takes it seriously, and then it turns out he really likes her, and she's still kind of reluctant to get involved. She even talks about how the fact, "You're the student, I'm the teacher, this is not appropriate, this is not ethical." So there really was not that chemistry on screen.
Mhm.
And as it turned out in real life, any chemistry they had was dissipating by the moment because they did divorce by the time the film came out.
That's right. Oh my gosh. I
Yeah.
find that fascinating.
It's interesting because in the next movie we're going to talk about in the second half of the show, The Changeling, the two key characters in that film, the two actors were married in real life and would be married for a long time, but we'll get to that later. The second story, Millicent and Therese. This for me might have been the weakest of the three stories, but it was still good.
Mhm.
I thought the tension between the two characters was palpable. The one thing, though, is the twist here. I kind of saw that coming the first time I saw this, even as a child. I kind of felt, yeah, I know where this is going. Did you get that same feeling too?
Um, not a great deal. Not a great deal. I thought the story was
Okay.
really interesting, but again, it's like one of those endings, I did not see that coming. Actually, I rewatched it for the second
Okay.
time because I'm like, "Did I miss something?" It's I might have missed a
Yeah.
clue or 2, but yeah. No, I did not see that.
Yeah. All right, so you didn't see that coming. I kind of did, but it was still interesting, the tension between the two characters and just how these two sisters absolutely loathed each other. I mean, really, you talk about sibling rivalry, this went to an extreme.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a cool storyline, though. Just pure psychological terror on that aspect. And, it was kind of
Yeah.
like it was something that I could see happening in real life, believe it or not. It kind of reminded me of I don't know if you ever read that book, Sybil, maybe like many, many years
Oh, yeah.
ago. Yeah, it kind of reminded me of that. That's kind of
Mhm.
why I should have seen the ending, but I didn't. But
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of reminiscent about that book.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I watched that in school, and, we had a lot of fun with that. We imitated Sybil for days after in class, after seeing that movie. I'm trying to think if that
Man.
was a made for TV movie also, it might have been.
I think it was because
Alright, then we
didn't
move
start
was it?
Sally Fields? Was it Sally Fields that might have been in that film? Maybe.
Yeah, Sally Field's in the movie, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think it came out early 80s, as I
Mhm.
recall. But at the time, I haven't seen it in years, but at the time, it was a movie that made quite a stir, and it made an impression on us. We were either in high school or seventh or eighth grade, something like that.
Mhm.
Okay, let's move on to the third story, and that's the one that everybody focuses on with this film, to the point where the first two stories, Julie and then Millicent and Therese, really get totally ignored. But Amelia is one of the great short stories in anthology history. In fact, you could look at all the anthology films, and we did a show months ago with Josh Hitchens about the great Amicus anthologies. And we've talked about other anthology films, especially from the 60s and 70s. But if you're looking for a single story, just one story out of the three or four or five that appear in a film, I think the one that most people talk about more than anything is this one, Amelia, with the African Zuni doll. When you first saw the doll come to life, we can give away that much. I mean,
Yeah.
it's 50 years ago, right? Not too much of a spoiler. When you first saw the doll come to life, what did you think? What was your reaction?
I was like, "What the heck?" It reminded me of, like, a feral wild cat. It was just crazy. That whole episode
Yeah.
was just bananas. The doll and its teeth, like, just just scary,
Yeah.
just scary. It was funny and comical, but it was still terrorizing. It was really, really conflicting opinions on that doll.
You found it funny, really?
I did. I found it
Hmm.
some of the actions were a little bit comical, with the
Yeah.
knife sticking it under the door and chiseling itself out of the suitcase. Like, it was certain moments were funny, but it was terrifying too because it was just this little monster of it all. It was just
Yeah.
wild.
I did a little bit of research into the movie, and I found this really good article in the New York Post from a couple of years ago. They were looking back at Trilogy of Terror, and they got some quotes from one of the co-producers on the film, Robert Singer. And he talked about how they managed the special effects for the Zuni doll coming to life and moving around the apartment. So this is what Singer said, quote, "This was long before visual effects are what they are today. We had to build a set about 8 feet above the stage floor to get the doll moving and chasing after Amelia. And then construction would cut a path the doll could move in. There was a puppet master underneath the stage running with the doll as he moved its arms and legs and all that." This continues the quote from Singer. When the doll is moving, it's all the puppet master. And as we're watching it, we said, this really works. So this is not CGI. This is not some modern day kind of technology. This is a practical effect using the actual doll and creating, I guess, this platform above the stage floor. And I think Singer's right. I think it really does work. And then if we get toward the end, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I think it's worth pointing out, Singer talks about the very end of the story when Karen Black puts the doll in the oven. And this is what Singer says: it had that awful screaming and thrashing around and burning. And when we sent the episode cut to the network, they thought it was too violent. I mean, it's a wooden doll, but they were put off by it. Standards and practices said it couldn't be that graphic. And Dan Curtis, of course, said it's a bleeping doll, for Christ's sakes. So Curtis was able to get it included, and it works. It's a kind of a terrifying ending of the film, but it does very much serve as a fitting conclusion to a terrific story. So it's kind of interesting how they were dealing with some efforts at censorship, especially in that it's a made-for-TV film.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it is a bit puzzling. You think, it is a doll. What's the big deal with putting a doll in the oven, right?
I
You know?
know. I'm really, really surprised that they had a, um a conflict with the studio about that, like the network.
Yeah.
Uh, like, first of all, I'm still absolutely flabbergasted. This was a made for TV film.
Yeah.
um, just because, there's certain things that are quite terrifying. I wouldn't think that in, like, I guess the 70s that, people would be ready for this to see it on TV.
Mhm.
But, it's interesting. It's just really interesting. It's a different part of, history, I guess.
Yeah. Tracy, let's talk a little bit about the actors. And of course, it all starts with Karen Black. I think she is stunningly good in this anthology, portraying the four diverse characters in a believable fashion. She really shows her range as an actress, applying the different roles, making them all credible. I don't think Black ever really received her full due as an actress. She was sometimes saddled with bad movies. She made a really ridiculous horror film that we should talk about one time. It's Alive, Island of the Alive, which came out in the mid 1980s. Really, it's one of those so bad it's good movies. She also made mediocre films like Invaders from Mars. But then again, she also had a chance to play in some really good horror films. Burnt Offerings, another Dan Curtis production, and also House of a Thousand Corpses, directed by Rob Zombie. And then if you get outside the genre of horror, she did Easy Rider and also Five Easy Pieces, which are two excellent, excellent films. But I think as an actress, she doesn't really get her full due. And I think maybe if more non horror fans saw what she did in Trilogy of Terror, they would realize how good she actually was. Give me some of your thoughts on Karen Black's performance here.
I think she was excellent. I mean, in all 3 stories here, like, she portrayed such different types of characters, and she was unrecognizable in each role. Like, really, just her acting abilities, I think, were through the roof. Um, again, I believe she is so underrated as an actress. Just she she takes a script and she basically makes it her own, and she just like throws herself into these characters. Now, these stories weren't very long, but I
Hmm.
mean, you seriously could have had a movie based on each one of these stories, and she really could have pulled it off. I just think she's excellent, and you know, she made this movie and all 3 stories, especially the last one, memorable to people who aren't even horror fans. Like, you talk about the Zuni doll, and I think everybody knows what that creature is, right? Whether they've
Yeah.
seen this or not. But, I really do think she's excellent, and, you know, that very last moment in the Zuni doll episode of her,
Yeah.
I will never get that out of my brain. That's now embodied in my head. So,
Yeah.
you know, she'll forever live in my memory just like that.
Yeah. Same for me. You put this film in the hands of a lesser actress, an ordinary or mediocre actress, and the film could just totally flop. But you put it in the hands of Karen Black, she really carries the movie from start to finish. The script is good, yes, but there's so much dependent on her acting and going from one character to another and making them believable, and she's able to pull it off. And I think that was really a characteristic of her. A lot of the films that she starred in a lot of films that weren't very good, both horror and non-horror, but she usually elevated the material with her performance. Now, I think this is a good script, but she makes it even better. And that's really a tribute to Karen Black. Let's also give some credit to the underrated director of Trilogy of Terror. I've long been a fan of Dan Curtis. I love all the stuff that he's done with Dark Shadows. He did the two Dark Shadows films in the early 70s, including House of Dark Shadows, Burnt Offerings. Trilogy of Terror is not quite on the same level as those movies, but it's close. And like most of his films, they're well shot, they're well edited, good scripts. He often did rely on Richard Matheson, as he does in this movie. Also, the other writer we should mention, the late William Nolan. He was the guy who wrote the screenplay for Burnt Offerings, which is one of my favorites. So Nolan knew what he was doing as well. So the writing is good, the direction is good, the camera work is very fine. This is one of the better made for TV movies, I think, of the 1970s or really of any era. I give 3.5 stars to Trilogy of Terror. Really like this one. Remains a favorite. It does hold up over time. Tracy, what's your rating for the film?
Yeah, I totally agree. This does live up. Anybody can watch it today and still enjoy it and appreciate it for what it was. Again, I find it so odd it's a made for TV movie. I'm not used to seeing something like that. But you know what?
Mhm.
I give it 3 stars. I thought it was pretty good, and I think everybody should watch it if they haven't seen it. It's really great, and it's not that long. I wanna say it's like an hour and 15 minutes or something like that because it was a made-for-TV film. Um, and you can
Yeah.
watch it in segments if you want. You don't have to watch, like, all 3 at the same time, but, it's great. I think Karen Black rocked each role, and, she's, like, amazing. She did such an excellent job. But I do overall, I only give it 3.5 stars, and I feel bad about that actually. Or sorry, 2.5 stars.
Well, you said 3 stars to begin.
Did I say 3 stars? Oh my god. See,
You
I'm
said 3
conceited.
stars, and you're reducing it already.
I'm reducing it already. 3.5 stars, Bruce.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my final answer.
You wanna say
Sorry.
3.5 stars.
2.5. Oh
Okay.
my
All
god.
right. 2
2.5 stars. Okay, I'm done. 2.5 stars. Yes. I'm
two and a
all over
half
the place.
stars.
2.5
Boy,
stars.
you're a tough judge. Only 2.5 stars?
Well,
Really?
see, I'm so
Wow.
conflicted. I said 3.5, then I said 3, then I said 2.5, but I think I'm gonna, like, settle on 2.5, and I feel bad.
Alright, so
Yeah,
I go
it's okay.
3.5, you go 2.5. It averages 3 stars between the
Oh, there
2
you
of
go.
us.
Well, see, I
Yeah.
guess I was forward thinking. There we go.
You are a tough critic, and they say I'm a tough critic, but you're much tougher than I am. Alright, so that's our first film from 1975, made for TV from Dan Curtis, Trilogy of Terror. What we'll do now is we'll take a short break on the program, and when we come back, we'll look at another very fine film from around the same time period, 5 years later, 1980. It's a great haunted house story starring the great George C. Scott, and that movie is called The Changeling. We'll talk about it when we come back right here on the Ghostly Gallery. We are back on the Ghostly Gallery, ready for the second half of the show. We just did a thorough examination of the 1975 film Trilogy of Terror. And now we move on to a film from 1980, one of my favorites, The Changeling. So this film released into American theaters March 28th of 1980. It's one of my favorite ghost story films. It's a film that also gives us one of the best actors of all time, the legendary George C. Scott. So in this film, Scott plays John Russell. He is a famous composer and respected music professor. The movie begins in really horrific fashion with a car accident involving his family in upstate New York. And that obviously hit home with me because that's where I live in upstate New York. The car breaks down, forcing the entire family, he, his wife, and daughter, have to push the car to the side of the road. John's wife and daughter stay with the car while John crosses the street to use a payphone. Of course, this is 1980, so no cell phones. And he's going to call local garage from there. As John stands in the phone booth getting ready to make the call, he then watches a large truck approach and he starts to fear the worst. And his fears are confirmed. That large truck is out of control. It slams into their car at the side of the road and kills both his wife and daughter. I mean, it's really one of the more tragic beginnings to a horror film. So from this point, John is just hoping for a fresh start. He decides to move across the country from New York City. That's where he and his family had lived in a nice apartment. He moves to Seattle, to the great Northwest. And there he takes a job with his alma mater, working as a music professor. He's also looking for a place to rent. He wants to find a house that he can rent. And he meets up with Claire Norman, who is played by Trish Vanderveer. Claire works for a local historical society, and they kind of own this turn of the century Victorian mansion, which is called the Chessman House. It's a large house, and it's got some really nice features to it, but it's also a house that really nobody has lived in for any length of time for many, many years. But he decides he likes the house. It's got a lot of room. It provides him with a quiet place. He can write his music in solitude. Now, when John first tours the house, he's led around by Claire, we actually get our first glimpse at the strange activity within the Chessman house. As John and Claire are kind of leaving the main room, there's a living room piano where actually one of the keys moves by itself. It's not a player piano. It's not supposed to do that. Plays one note, does so by itself. So right there, you know there's some kind of a presence in this very large mansion. But that is really just the start to what's going on. Long series of strange occurrences follow that one. Not too long after John moves in, one night he hears thunderously loud banging, as if someone has taken a hammer and is hitting the pipes in the house. I mean, it's thunderous. It's echoing throughout the house. Nobody could sleep through it. He finds it a bit mystifying. He checks with a handyman who is sort of part of the deal. He comes by and takes care of things. And the handyman basically explains, well, this is normal. It's an older house. It goes back, probably 70 plus years. This is the kind of thing. You'll hear strange noises like that. Then another incident happens a bit later on. And in this case, John hears water running upstairs. So he heads up the stairs. He goes to a bathroom and he sees that water is running in the tub. And of course, that's strange because he's the only one living there. There's no one else there. The handyman's not there. Claire's not there from the historical society. Who is running the water? So he turns off the water before it starts to spill onto the floor from the tub. And then just as he's getting ready to leave this bathroom, he catches a glimpse of a body under the water. At this point, I'm not really sure if he feels like he actually saw someone submerged or if he's just maybe hallucinating. He's been through a terrible tragedy, a terrible ordeal. He's probably wondering, did I really see this or am I just imagining things? But again, another strange incident. And then one day, and this is really a key turning point in the film, John is walking out of the house, probably mid-afternoon. He walks into the front driveway. And just as he's walking outside, a small red window pane from the house shatters. And the glass falls onto the ground right near John. He's lucky he's not, impaled with the glass. He's not hurt, but kind of weird that this would happen. So he looks up to see exactly where the broken window is. And he sees that the pane of glass, which is red, is from a room at the very top of the 3-story mansion. He's able to match it up to the red glass that's still intact. So he decides to re-enter the house and do a little bit of investigating to see what room this came from. So all the way at the top on the 3rd floor, try to figure out how it is that this glass just shattered with nobody being there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when he gets up to that area on the 3rd floor, he realizes the room has sort of been cut off from the rest of the house. There has been a wooden wall. I think it's made of wood that's been put up as a barrier. And he realizes that this room where that broken glass came from has actually been sectioned off. So he breaks through it. And sure enough, when he breaks through that wall, that temporary wall, he finds this small hidden room. And it's a tiny room, an attic room. It's filled with cobwebs. I mean, it hasn't been occupied for decades. It hasn't been cleaned for decades. And in the room, in addition to all the cobwebs, he finds a couple of interesting items. One is a small music box. He lifts up the music box and he hears a song that is similar to a piece of music that he's been sort of playing around with. Finds that's a strange coincidence. And then he also finds an old wooden wheelchair, and one that's kind of small, looks like it belonged to a child. So this is important because this is going to give him some real clues as to who exactly is behind the haunting of this mansion, the Chessman House. But there's more in terms of weird activity. One day, as John is downstairs, main floor, he hears another sound. It's not a banging sound, but it's the sound of a rubber ball bouncing. He goes out in the hallway, he looks at the stairway, and he sees this multicolored rubber ball, which belonged to his daughter. I believe her name was Kathy, and it was a ball that she loved. She always played with it. He kept it after her death, after the death of the daughter and his wife. And for some reason, the ball has made its way down that main staircase. And it's bouncing, and then it lands in the hallway in the entrance of the house. So he finds this really weird, that this ball all of a sudden has gotten loose. It's bouncing through the house. He then ends up taking the ball and he throws it into a local body of water. I think it's a river, because he doesn't want it around anymore. He's disturbed by this bouncing incident. And then he returns to the house later in the day, and it's a repeat. Once again, the ball, the same ball, the one that belonged to his daughter, is bouncing down the main stairway. So even though he's thrown it away, gotten rid of it, the ball somehow has made a return to the house. So this is really eerie. Boy, the first time I saw that really creeped me out. So Tracy, after all these strange activities, John and Claire, his new friend from the Historical Society, decide to bring in a psychic to conduct a seance in the house. The psychic, named Leah, is able to make contact with the spirit of a boy named Joseph, who apparently lived in the house some 70 years earlier, early 1900s. John eventually discovers that the boy's full name is Joseph Carmichael. And that's kind of strange because that's the same name as a very local and prominent senator, also named Joseph Carmichael. And this senator financially supports the Historical Society that is renting the Chessman House. So this begins the thought process in John Russell's mind. What is the connection between these two Joseph Carmichaels? What's going on here? And this connection will ultimately unlock the mystery to the haunting of the house and the spirit and its repeated attempts to contact John. So this is what is going on in the film. And it's all kind of laid out in a progressive fashion, sort of builds one layer upon another. It's a really good mystery that is sustained. And then we, in the final act, finally learn what's going on. And then we're subjected to another great twist ending. So that's the basic storyline for The Changeling. So again, Tracy, I'm curious, when was the first time you saw The Changeling, and what were your initial thoughts of it?
Oh gosh. So I remember seeing this one for sure a really, really long time ago when I was a kid. So it was like back in the VHS days, like rented it from the video store, popped it in and watched it. So I was young. I want to say probably, oh, I don't know, maybe 10, maybe 11 years old. And it's one of those movies, I'm really surprised that I never went back to watch it again after I watched it as a kid. But it's
Mm.
always been on my radar to go watch it again, um, because I didn't really remember a whole lot about it. The only thing that I remembered was the creepy wheelchair flying down the stairs and the red bouncy ball, because I had a ball just like that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So it just kind of
Mhm.
like stuck with me. Um, but it was a great supernatural themed movie, and it ticked all those boxes for me.
Yeah. I forgot to mention that about the wheelchair, because
Mm,
one night when Claire and John are in the house, they see the wheelchair at the top of the stairs, and then it comes crashing down at them, and they're able
mhm.
to get out of the way. So that's another incident that happens in the film. All right, let's talk a little bit about the actors here. So we have George C. Scott playing the main role, and as usual, he's great, which you expect nothing less from a legendary actor like that. But then you also have his real life wife, Trish Vandeveer, who in real life was 14 years younger than George C. Scott. She looks very young for her age, and George C. Scott, who was kind of a hard liver the way that he approached things, probably looks a little bit older than he actually was. But there is a 14-year difference between them. But they got married in the early 70s, and they remained married up until his death. So Trish Vandeveer co-stars as this real estate agent, Claire. She's very friendly. She's very accommodating. She knows what John has been through. She's very sympathetic to him. I thought that both Trish Vandeveer and George C. Scott performed exceptionally well, and they have great chemistry, which is not surprising considering that they were a real life married couple. I guess the one thing that surprised me, they never become romantically involved in the movie. I kept waiting for that to happen. It didn't. Were you surprised by that, Tracy?
Actually, I was, because they were headed in that direction, and then they just
Yeah.
never did. Yeah.
Yeah, it was of kind of interesting. I wonder if maybe they did some scenes where they do become romantic, and just because of the length of the film, maybe they got cut. I don't know. Um, but they're obviously very friendly, and you can see that there's definitely a spark between the two. And of course, he's obviously, he's a widower. She's not married. She has to take care of her mother, who's not all that well. So she's not married. It seemed like that was the next logical step. But anyway, they're both
Mhm.
outstanding in the movie. And then you have some other very good supporting players. Melvin Douglas is the Senator Carmichael. Melvin Douglas made this film around the same time that he did Ghost Story, and he would die relatively soon after these movies. I mean, he's pretty old to be making these films, and
Mhm.
he's if this were a real life Senate, he'd probably be the oldest member of the Senate. But he's very good in the film. There's a bit of a creepiness to him. We see him initially when he's delivering a speech at an event that John Russell goes to with Claire. At that time, John Russell has no idea about his connection to the house, his connection, if any, to the spirit. He has no inkling of that. And then his character sort of disappears for a while, but they make a point of showing him giving this speech that is witnessed by everybody in this hotel. And you kind of know they're going to come back to Senator Carmichael, and they end up doing that.
Mhm.
Then you have Jean Marsh, who works at the Historical Society, and she tries to tell John, you should leave this house with all these incidents that are happening. This fits in with the history of that house. There have been a lot of problem whenever someone has tried to live there. It's not fit for people to reside in that house, not fit for people to live there. So right off the bat, she's the character that's telling John, get out. Claire at first is encouraging him to stay there. He's been through trauma. It could be that, he's imagining things. Although
Mhm.
eventually she does come around to the belief that, yeah, he does need to get out of the house. But initially, no, she feels he should stick with it. So those are four of the main characters that appear. There's lots of other side characters as well, but those are really, I think, the four key ones. And really, the big three are George C. Scott, Trish Van Devere, and Melvin Douglas. So of these characters, the character I like the most is not the George C. Scott character. I like the Trish Van Devere character because she's just so nice and sympathetic and compassionate for what John has gone through. And she just seems like, this ideal person who can rescue John from his depression and from, what he's gone through, the tragedy, help him kind of move on to the second part of his life. So I really thought her performance was great, yet it was also very believable. How about you? Which of these characters did you like the most in the film?
So I really I really like George C. Scott's character. His performance was phenomenal. I've always remembered him being kind of like gruff and kind of crotchety and just kind of like get off my lawn type of a guy. Just because I have the movie Patton and A Christmas Carol lodged into my brain, when I think of George C. Scott, that's kind of the persona that I think of. But in this
Hmm.
movie, even though he was like emotionally traumatized with what he went through, he was really, really great. He was, you know, although he was broken with the loss of his family, he was trying to kind of move forward. And then he was like thrust into this house that had a past, and he connected to the spirit that was in this house. And, you know, I I never would have thought that he would have been like a believer in this type of thing. So just because he's, like, so stoic and very straight and narrow, like, even in this movie, I found it really strange that he was an automatic type believer that there's something going on in this house, and he automatically went to the world of the supernatural. So I thought that was pretty
Yeah.
cool. That was pretty cool. So I
Yeah.
really admired that piece. The other one that I absolutely loved was the lady that played the medium, the psychic. Um,
Oh, yeah.
she was awesome. And I actually believe like, hey, maybe this lady really is a medium because like she was just in that trance state, communicating with the spirit, and that whole seance scene
Yeah.
was well done, just so well done. It wasn't cheap or tacky or, anything like that. It was so intense and terrifying. And I thought she did a great job, a really great job. And, as a paranormal investigator, Bruce, like I would love to get the evidence that they got during that seance. Like
Hmm.
just fantastic. So I really liked her
Yeah.
performance too. Yeah.
I have to ask you about that writing that she was doing, and there's a name for that. I don't know what it's like, ghostly writing, or where she's in contact with the spirit, whoever that is.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think her eyes are closed, and she has paper in front of her, and she's seemingly randomly writing things. Some of it is just scribble and nonsense, but other things are tangible answers to questions that she's asking. Like when she asks, "What is your name?" she actually writes Joseph on the page.
Mhm.
And there's that other actor, longtime actor Eric Christmas. He keeps removing the paper when she's filled up one page with this secret writing or whatever you call it. Um, he pulls that page out so that she has another blank page to work from, and she's just frantically writing back and forth. And as somebody like yourself who's a ghost hunter, I guess this is considered a legitimate form of psychic knowledge, right? This kind of writing,
Yeah. I've
correct?
seen it. Yeah, I've seen it before. Like I've never witnessed it like personally, but I've seen it done in different documentaries, and I find it fascinating because like just like they did in this film, they kind of go into that trance and they're just kind of like
Mhm.
making circles or whatever until something actually pulls through. And you know, every documentary I've seen, like, this actress nailed it right to a T. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool scene. It's done differently than a lot of seance scenes because of that strange writing that she's
Mm,
doing, frantically filling up the page. But it's really well done. I wanna go back to what you said about George C. Scott and how you liked him the most. And I think one of the things that makes him sympathetic is that scene where he starts teaching at the university, which is his alma mater,
mhm.
and he walks in and it's an auditorium and it's just filled with students because they all know him. He's a famous composer. They want to learn from him. And the way that he jokes around with those students, the rapport that he has with those students, you can kind of tell this is a good guy. You know, he's gone through a horrible tragedy and he's obviously still suffering from depression, but he's able to put that aside and develop this great back and forth with these kids, these college students. I thought that made him very likable right off the start, right there.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think that scene was pretty good too. And I mean, he just had that persona in this film where he seemed to be a lot more relatable, I guess, as a human being instead
Yeah.
of, like, just, like, a really hard character. He was just relatable, he was emotional, and, there was, like, a scene where he was having a dream about, the accident, and, he woke up to the pounding, like, sound in the house, but he was very emotional, like,
Yeah.
you could see it, and he's just a great he was such a great actor. Just within the roles that he played, including this movie.
Yeah, I think both George C. Scott and Trish Van Devere
Mhm.
succeed in making their characters likable. You're rooting for them. You want them to get at the root of what's going on in the house. And at the same time, you've got your suspicions of Senator Carmichael. And you just, even from that first scene, you kind of know there's something going on with this guy, something a little bit sinister. And little by little, that is revealed until the conclusion of the film, which involves a confrontation between him and the character of John Russell. We should mention Tracy, the director of this film. He's not very well known. Director Peter Medic, who did a few other horror films. I think he did Species 2, but not really well known for horror movies. But he was on the money in this film. I thought he did a great job. It's a combination of horror and mystery. It's a film that has an old fashioned feel. It comes out in 1980, but it almost feels like a film that could have been made in 1970 or 1965. That old mansion, the Chessman House, is a great backdrop. It's used very well. And man, that scene with the bouncing ball coming down the stairs, not once, but twice, that really was well done. So there were some great choices
Mhm.
made by director Medic in this movie. In looking back at this film, some critics have called The Changeling the best horror film of 1980. I suppose that's up for debate. There were some other good films that came out. The Fog, which we talked about not too long ago. The Shining, that's of course a classic with Jack Nicholson. Also, the first Friday the 13th, not my favorite movie, but it spawned the franchise. It is popular with a lot of horror fans. So those are three others that came out in 1980. I would put The Changeling at the top of the list. Uh, but even if you don't think it's that good, I don't think there's much argument that this is a quality film. It's one that has become one of my all time favorites. I consider it a classic, even though a lot of horror fans, younger horror fans, have probably not seen it, and maybe non genre fans are not familiar with it. But to me, it is a classic. I go 4 stars for The Changeling. What do you think, Tracy?
Yeah. I think it's, like, a really underrated horror film. You're right, I don't think a lot of the younger, horror fans of today have ever seen this because you mention it and nobody knows about it. It deserves so much more acknowledgement than what it gets. It was a slow burn, but it was so worth it to see the ending and how the story unfolds. I didn't find not one thing bad with this movie. And I was pleasantly impressed just how great of a ghost story, like an actual ghost story this was. Really
Mhm.
awesome atmosphere. It was creepy. Um, it holds up after 45 years and, I just I am so thrilled with this one. I gave it 4 big stars, which is really rare because I think I
Hmm.
gave, Late Night with the Devil 4 stars or maybe 4.5, I can't remember now, but, it's up there. Like, I was really, really
Yeah.
impressed with it, just because there were, like, bits and pieces I remembered as a kid, but to sit back and actually just watch it and there's no gore, there's, like, nothing like that.
No.
There's no CGI, it's all practical effects, and it's all about what we didn't see in this movie, which I think was really good, It was like a total atmospheric, creepy movie. I really liked it. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting because the way they left it, how they ended this movie, um, there's I feel like there's so much more to the story. Like, there could have been so much more,
Mm.
like, whether they followed it up with something else, but I'm curious to know,
Yeah.
do you think after watching the end of this movie that the spirit finally found peace at the end? Or do you think he will forever haunt the grounds that house stood on?
I think he did find peace. I think he did find peace with it. I understand what you're saying, that you could interpret it a different way, and you could see a sequel being made.
Mm.
But you know what? Hollywood today, if they tried to make a sequel for this movie, they would screw it up.
Oh,
I'm convinced of that.
absolutely. Oh my gosh,
Yeah. This is
absolutely.
an
And
old-fashioned horror film. It
mhm,
it needs to be done in a certain way. I guess if you had the right director like a Robert Eggers who really knew what he was doing,
mhm,
but there'd be a temptation to have all sorts of CGI effects and, to have gore and violence, and I wouldn't trust most Hollywood directors of today with
mhm.
this film. I
Oh
wouldn't.
my goodness. No,
Yeah.
absolutely not. Yeah. No,
You
I
mentioned
thought
the
it was
practical effects.
mhm,
They're limited, but they're really well done. You know,
mhm.
the way that they have that burning staircase toward the end,
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool.
Oh my
I thought
gosh,
that was really
yes.
well done. So what they did basically, the effects that they used, whether it's the bouncing ball or the glass shattering, they were simple, basic effects that they knew they could execute without much difficulty.
Mhm.
And if you take each one by itself, maybe not that impressive, but you put them all together, a succession of events, and it works really well. So I thought that was
Yeah,
great too.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it was really well done, Bruce. Absolutely.
So we both agree on the Changeling. We love this one. Both give it 4 stars, and that's pretty unusual for us to both say that a film deserves 4 stars. Of course, Nosferatu, I think you gave that 4 stars. I gave it 4.5. So this one
Right.
gets 4 stars from each of us for The Changeling. Earlier in the show, we talked about Trilogy of Terror. I went with 3.5. Tracy initially said 3, but then downgraded it to 2.5. And perhaps before we leave the airwaves, it might be down to 2. So we better shut this thing down now before you reduce the stars on that one.
Oh,
So two and a
exactly.
half from Tracy for Trilogy of Terror, 3.5 from me. But two worthwhile films. If you've not seen Trilogy of Terror or The Changeling, both are worth taking a look at, and you can find both for free on different streaming sources. So they're good movies, and they're worth looking at 45 and 50 years after the fact. All right, Tracy, that's going to wrap things up for the show. Thank you as always. Appreciate your thoughts and your effort on this one.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. And I'm so happy I got to watch The Changeling again. So thank you for that one.
Absolutely worth a look, no question. Well, we want to thank Tracy for her contributions. We want to thank all of you for listening as well. We do appreciate that you join us each week in this Museum of the Macabre, and we hope we'll see you again next time right here in the Ghostly Gallery.